Hello and welcome to the third in our series of interpreting landscape photographs using Lightroom, and we left off in the last episode looking at the basic module in Lightroom and specifically the light adjustments, so the exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites and blacks, and we looked at 3 or 4 photographs and came to a conclusion at the end with the final picture that quite often these adjustments need to be applied locally. So in this episode we'll be looking at the brush and graduated filter tool.
And I think it's really worth pointing out that there is a direct link to both taking pictures out in the field. Graduated filters are something that many of us apply in camera, and we have the equivalent here in Lightroom. And the brush tool is very much the same, to me at any rate, as dodge and burn in the darkroom. That is controlling brightness and contrast using selective application of light, and that's what we're going to be doing here in effect.
Now we're going back to the first image we treated, and this we got fairly close using the broad adjustments, but we decided at one point we were going to use a graduated filter, and we briefly covered what we did with a graduated filter. This time we're going to reset everything using the big button at the bottom, and we can do this because Lightroom always has the raw file at the bottom. All the treatments are layers on top, as it were. So over to you, Joe.
Well, I'd like to suggest what we do here, Tim, is apply initially a graduated filter pretty much all the way across, and it's literally, this is to compensate for the use of the graduated filter in camera, so that's pretty much right. And whereas it was necessary to use that grad to prevent too much highlight clipping, but the result is that I carried a lot of density into the shadows, with the result that the shadows are very, very, very subdued. So here, if we go for 100% shadow recovery, the beauty of that is we've not only recovered it in the hillside in the distance, but also just in the vegetation on the right hand side, recovered to quite a large extent. In fact, with this I'd be quite happy to pull the top edge, that is, there you go, the 100% line, and I think you can still, yeah, almost completely works perfectly, as there's no apparent negative effect from that. It hasn't, of course, affected the highlights at all. I think one thing that perhaps we should mention is, if we look at our basic, I beg your pardon, if we look at our graduated filter controls on the right hand side, it gives us almost all of our basic controls, and a few others in fact. It includes temperature control, and if you look at the blues in the sky in this picture, to me they look a little bit yellow, so I'd be tempted to tune that slightly, quite possibly by taking the blue slider, the temperature slider, a little bit to the left.
Would you like a new grad, or you trying to apply it on this
one? Well, maybe it's lazy, but I would tend to, if I feel that the overall zone of the grad is accurate, then I would just use the same grad.
Okay, so
we could try that, and then a little bit of magenta, because curiously, sometimes when you get a very cyan effect in blue,
yes,
it's also down to the tint being too green, and that's cooled it off. Now, that's actually not done any harm, partly because with distance we expect the light to become bluer, and this is going to work in our favour because the foreground with the autumnal colours, we want to retain the kind of warmth there, and when we pay our attention to that very shortly, we'll perhaps be able to do an opposite colour tweak.
Okay.
So we've actually cooled off the sky in the distance, we've lifted the shadows, but there might be one or two other things that we need to do.
So would we look at the global adjustments now again?
Well, I think we could do, but I'm struck by the fact that although we've lightened those shadows on the far side, there's it's still quite, how can I put it, a little bit muddy,
yes,
in the shadows, and although it's perfectly believable, I think a little bit of additional definition wouldn't go amiss. So, but to do that, we don't want to use this existing graduated filter, because if we increase contrast, let's say, then it's going to apply to the clouds and the sky, and that wouldn't be good. So at this point, I'd be looking to go to an adjustment brush.
Okay, well, we go to adjustment, and we've got a new one selected. So the adjustment brush, we should talk about a couple of the settings down at the bottom here, which are the flow and feather settings.
Yes.
Now, the feather setting you can visualize. It's the area of transition, in the same way as a grad has an area where it's going from full effect to no effect. The brush has the same. So if we look on the screen here, we can see the plus sign in the center of the brush. We can see a hard line, quite contrasty line around the plus, and just beyond that you can see a lighter line, and that's the feather zone of the brush effect. Now if I change the feather on here, we should be able to see that
Contracting.
it moves that outside line in and out. So if I have no feather, I get a very hard edge and it looks quite artificial. If I put a large feather on, which I think both you and me tend to have it on a large feather for the majority of our work, the effect is graduated in the same way as a graduated filter is graduated.
Yes, exactly, and I think the beauty of this, as we're going to see shortly, is that you can essentially paint light, and you can do so with an almost completely organic transition. It's also true that because there's a kind of arbitrary maximum feather amount, which we are using, and I'd agree we should use it all the time, almost all the time, there are exceptions, but mostly, then the bigger the brush, the greater the feather.
Yes.
And that's important. So if you have a very big brush, you have an incredibly soft feather. If you have a small brush, then even though the feather is the same ratio, it's clearly going to provide a harder edge. So we need to be mindful of that as we use it. The flow, I personally always leave it set at 100, but it literally applies. So I think I'm right in saying is if you click and brush once, let's say you've got it set at 50, it'll apply a 50%, and if you then click and brush again, you get the remaining 100%.
Yes.
So
I think what it does is it keeps on adding it. So if I have it on 50%, I apply once and I get 50%. I apply it again and I get 50% of what's left.
Okay.
And so you can keep on adding until it gets closer and closer to the 100% effect. Okay. That's I think the way I understand it. But for most of what we're going to do at the moment, we're going to leave it at 100%, because we want to try and mark out an area of effect, really.
We do, and we've got the size button on the module, but most people I know who use Lightroom on a daily basis use the square brackets, or you can also use the as you just were.
That's the square brackets, that's the scroll wheel on the mouse, which is quite a nice way of doing it.
Really useful, yeah.
Now we're going to try and mark off an area of this background where we've got low contrast. Is that correct?
That's right. So we're really looking at the dark, that rather dark, rather subdued zone, without too much carryover into the sky, because that line of the hillside, we don't want to exaggerate that.
Yeah. Now, one thing to be wary of is when the first time you click, starts brushing, but it leaves the marker. So if you ever want to put your marker somewhere and remember where it is for that effect, it's worth clicking intentionally. So I'm going to leave the marker there, so I know it's for this area.
Okay.
And then I'm going to paint. Hopefully keeping the feather just out of the sky, hopefully.
And we've got the mask turned off. You can actually paint with the mask turned on, can't you?
I think so. I've never done it. So how would I do that?
So I think there's an auto mask.
Yes.
I think it's different versions of Lightroom, possibly. There may be. We'll see if we can
find that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the text to go with it. But if you want to see what the mask is doing, you can put your mouse over your control point, and you can see where it's gone. So I can see that. I probably need a little bit more there. But it's generally covered everywhere. I might just add a bit more, changing the size of it around that horizon area, and possibly over there. I'm not sure it needs too much of it, but we'll see. And now we've applied that with no change on. Another way, if you want to, of seeing the effect is by putting a big change on.
Yes.
And then you can actually see what's going on.
And you can see also when you use this example how as the brush gets smaller, so the feather becomes harder.
Yes.
And there is a kind of associated risk, as it were.
Yes, that area there that I've
yes,
just done.
exactly.
But we'll play around with this, because quite often, even though that looks quite a hard transition, it may not be visible, depending on what changes you're making.
Sure thing.
So we'll set the exposure back to 0, and the change we were going to make was to add contrast, I think.
We're going to add contrast, and as we do so, we'll find the darks getting very, very dark. So when we do that, we'll also need to pull exposure up. I think it's quite good to use that hard contrast, and then we'll essentially tune it back once we've got something that looks reasonably natural. And also I think it's important to remember that with distance, so you do lose definition by anybody's awareness. Anybody who knows landscape well knows that with distance you lose definition. So we don't want to overdo it. It's really important that this is about making the image work, but if it looks unnatural, then it simply will undermine its credibility.
We wouldn't expect to see any hard blacks in this area.
No, for sure.
Yeah. So we can see now that my rough masking has gone over the edge here at the back.
Yes.
So what I might do is go into the erase tool, put my flow up to quite high, and just erase on those areas where things have gone a bit awry.
And I think you can also just use the Alt key if you've got the brush applied, but it does the same thing. And there's always so many different ways. And I think it's also a matter of personal, experimentation to how to get the softest transitions. I think the primary objective for me is always to retain that feeling of the credibility of the light, the authenticity of the light. If you can do that with these controls, then you're in good shape. So we've increased the contrast to quite a bit, 3/4 of max, and exposure has come up over half a stop in the process, and it's looking a lot healthier.
Yeah, we're going to probably go a little bit further now. I've corrected the mask slightly. That's about as far, maybe too far that.
It's good that we've got the white background on, I think, because this is the sort of thing which it'd be very easy to get wrong if the black background was on.
Yes, I'm just checking my mask again to make sure that's not going.
Yeah, that looks good. I mean, one thing that's worth remembering is that when you are using these adjustments in a very complex image like this with a lot of different textures, it's relatively forgiving. When you do images which, I don't know, one could think of, say, the desert with large areas of smooth sand, or a kind of coastal scene with very calm water and large areas of smooth sky, then you've got to be terribly careful using these kind of localized adjustments. Whereas here, with all that texture, it's quite an easy thing to do.
Another quite useful tool is if we roll our mouse over the control point, we see a little vertical bar, and what that's telling us is we can drag the effect on and off. And it's sadly, I don't think it lets you go all the way to the left when you're on the control point. That's slightly annoying, isn't it?
Yeah, that is worth remembering.
Might be a way around that, but I don't know. Maybe that's another reason why you need to put the control point somewhere
in the middle.
Different. But we can see some of the effect there anyway.
That's really interesting. The contrast, when you had it even over at 100%, it's, to me, looks fine. And the contrast has also increased the colour saturation. Not a huge amount here because there's very, very little colour in there anyway, but we're now seeing colours in those shadows that were previously just mush. So, I think that's a good thing. Can we have a very quick look at that area at 100% so that we can check there's not too much of a noise issue that we're going to have to face up to? Just click that off. I think that's worth a quick point to make. You want to get rid of the brush, just click on the brush symbol. I think you can see there's a little bit of noise, but it's honestly really not bad at all. Maybe because there's a lot of texture again. There's no major issues.
Looks very acceptable.
Yeah. You can see a little bit of chromatic aberration, but I think that's going to come for another episode. So at this point, I'd be looking at that and thinking, well, I'm happy, I think, with the distant hillside, but the foreground now looks really quite dark, and there's a tremendous amount of colour information in that would be good to bring out, especially because it probably is going to have a fairly commercial application,
Yes.
this picture, given my clients at the time. But before we do that, there's just a couple more things I'd like to do with the adjustment brush, which is quick, and that is to just subdue those highlights in the top left and the bottom left, where the camera is very close to the sun.
So we're going to use highlight reduction, and make sure we're on the brush tool, change the size of
That's
it,
good,
and
yeah.
I'm just going to dab once
That's it.
on that area,
Lovely.
and we're going to do the same thing up here, I think.
Correct. Fantastic. And that not only brings in more texture, but also helps the eye, stop the eye kind of whizzing out of the edge of the image. At least I think it does. And in fact, it's, as well as pulling back the highlights, it's also reduced the contrast a little bit, but it has increased the apparent texture. So overall, happy with that, and I think it's time to go to another adjustment.
Now if you're in an adjustment, a brush adjustment or a graduated filter adjustment, and you're ready to add another brush or another filter, you click on New, and that will give you a new panel.
And it leaves the existing adjustment, so you then need to either zero it or make your new correction if you wish to apply it. And I must say, although you, as you showed us earlier, you can use the brush blind, so to speak, I quite like to apply the adjustment, as it were, painting it as I go.
Yes.
So in this case, what we're going to do, and it's a bit of guesswork, but a bit of exposure, so maybe plus 0.5,
Yeah.
and a bit of shadow recovery, maybe plus 30 or 40, and I'd like to brush in that foreground. Bit of a shock at first, isn't it? And it's certainly brought up almost too much colour, at least in that very immediate foreground where the greens have become very distracting. But I think that I think we could even use a bigger brush and just let it flow a little bit out into the lake, in the kind of right centre, where the transition is quite soft. It is forgiving, and that's working quite nicely. So if we just invert the image using the square brackets, we can now perhaps evaluate the balance of tones. It's sometimes when you first look at a picture, when you make an adjustment, it kind of looks wrong because you've got so used to looking at it a particular way round. And by doing this, we have the chance to see how the colour relationships are working. The colours are quite strong in this image, which is consistent with it being it was a bright day with very, very good clear air. And I think now you can see that at least the tonal relationships look quite natural and quite well balanced. So I think we could probably return to normal way up. And at least in terms of the overall balance, I'm fairly happy with that. I think there is still some colour fine-tuning to be done, but maybe we leave that to another time.
And we can look at another image we were looking at in our earlier episode, and in this particular image we had applied one graduated filter. So if I look at the graduated filter control, we had applied a highlight reduction and a slight exposure reduction over the sky. Now that's something you would still do, or if we were spending a bit more time?
Yes, I think so. I think balancing. I mean, this is incredibly different to the previous picture, and this is, for me, whereas the previous picture is very literal indeed, even though the distances involved are quite similar, the nature of the conditions and the kind of style of this picture is much more, well, it's a relatively high key and feel, and I think the lighting is asking for that. I don't feel compelled to try to kind of reproduce what I saw quite so much here. I see it as much more a kind of mood image. And my adjustments here would be, the remaining adjustments needed I think are quite small, but they'd be in keeping with the spirit of trying to keep the image very light and luminous, and really that would be my goal. I see a couple of things that bother me. The first is that the central zone, that hillside with the sort of broken shadows, is a little bit distracting in terms of the three domes in the distance, because to me that they're the kind of really I suppose the visual highlight of the picture.
Yeah.
And I also think that although I like the valley, the flat floodplain as it were, that too could be said to be competing a little bit too much with the very ethereal looking domes in the background. So I think the next adjustments we're going to make are about mitigating some of the contrast. So it's perhaps to make the contrast in those two zones that I've just mentioned even lower.
Yes.
So what do you think? Graduated filter or
I
adjustment brush?
think we could possibly start with a graduated filter over the whole of that area, maybe.
Sure. Why not?
We can give it a try. I've currently got some settings on there. Although having seen the fact that this is now curved, I'm tempted to get rid of that and then go back to the brush.
Right.
Something that looked level is no longer looking level to me. So we're looking at covering. Should we start with this area on the ground?
Sure, yes. And I think we should, although the shadow recovery might apply, we have quite a lot of exposure up, and I'm not sure that that's going to work. We do want to lower contrast, but we have to be very, very careful of that. I think that would be fine as a starting point.
Okay, so if we brush over this area.
Really interesting to note that as you do that it, as well as the contrast lowering, the colour falls away as well. So the intensity of the colour or the saturation
Yes.
is very, very subdued by that brush. So if you click on that, Tim, can we just see quick masks so we see where we've gone? Okay, so yeah, that looks good. You could go a tiny bit higher on the right hand side maybe, or maybe with a softer feather.
Increase the feather on that because it's
it wants to be very, very organic, that change, and we don't really want to spill into the domes at all. It is giving it overall, I think, that approach a lighter, more luminous feel. I think too, looking at the image with this white background as we are doing, I feel that we could probably just lighten the whole picture globally. So if we go off and yes, I think it's very, very important to avoid anything being very, very dark, because that will simply draw the eye to it. It's about this kind of rather ethereal mood. I'd also just like to see the image a bit smaller if we could.
And this is using the navigator panel. Now this all depends on the original size of the image, so we'll try the 1:8. Is that small enough, or do you want to go to the 1:16?
Yeah, that would be good. This is shot with Sony A7R, and it is helpful because you immediately find your eye going to certain kind of focal points in the picture, especially in the floodplain. Well, that's what my eye is drawn to. And it might be that we can just tune that first adjustment brush a little bit further, maybe to
this one.
Yes, and
yeah.
I think just overall, perhaps a little bit less contrast again, minus 50 maybe, minus 100, my goodness, that's probably a little bit too much.
Yeah.
And how would it be if we darkened it a tiny bit? So just down a little bit, so that in essence, now that we've brightened the overall exposure, I'm trying to draw the eye through the picture space to the domes in the distance. There's a great temptation to increase the contrast around the domes, but I really think that would be a mistake, because I think it will then start to become too literal, and really what I want is that very soft, ethereal feel to it.
Would you like to try increasing the exposure again?
Yes, I would. I've got one final request, which that's better, which is to go back to our adjustment brush. And I regret we haven't yet really scrutinised this tool, but I know from experience, I'm pretty sure from experience, that the right tool to use here is the clarity tool, and I'd like to take it left by about 30 points, not too many.
Oh.
What that does is essentially reduces the micro contrast in that area, so the eye will tend to go less to.
So what I'll do is I'll switch this on and off just by clicking on the slider.
Helpful. Yeah. I think I don't want to make it look as if it's got an obvious soft focus filter on that, so maybe it'll have to be more like -20. But I think just taking a little bit of clarity out of it helps to, I think, makes it more consistent with the kind of feel of the rest of the image.
And the negative clarity is working in a sort of veiling flare sort of way. It's reducing contrast, but it's doing it adaptively across the whole thing. What it's actually doing is a blurring effect, but I think it's a blurring effect that's quite difficult to see as a blur.
I think if you go back to normal sight and then we check the image at 100%, then pixel for pixel, and look at the foreground, we'll probably see that there is still fine detail. It's just that the contrast has been kind of almost drained out of it.
So if I switch between 0 and about -30.
It is like veiling flare. It's very interesting. Yeah.
And what it's done is it's lifted a lot of the blacks where they're close to light colours.
Yeah.
But where there are large areas of darker colour, it seems to leave them alone a little bit.
I think we'll go for something like -20. I think
Okay.
will be enough. And if we go back to normal view or fit-in view, and hopefully that feels now consistent with the domes of the hills in the distance. So, in the spirit of doing as little as possible, but as much as is necessary, I'd like to think that's almost there. You can see that the blue of the sky is maybe a little bit strong, top right hand corner. So why don't we just apply a very quick graduated filter there, and a new filter just in that top right hand corner.
Downwards.
Downwards, yeah.
Now this.
Yeah, so we're going to rotate it a little bit and just take a little bit of saturation out of there.
I've got to turn the contrast back down because that was on it earlier.
Right.
So we're going to desaturate that.
And this is about trying to balance all of the elements, including the colour elements in the image. So really, really minimising all the colour value without desaturating it globally. That's better.
So we're trying to bring the tone of the blue blending slowly into the hills.
Yeah, make it
rather than
consistent
standing out.
with the other elements. So that's good. And if we now jump out of there and go full screen maybe, or do you want to just tick?
No,
just
okay.
Sorry, just there we are. And we can see it's a delicate print. It's not the sort of thing I would do very often, but I'm trying to, as it were, bring out what I would regard as the kind of essential potential of this picture.
So we can go in and now switch the local adjustments on and off.
Okay. Yep. Happy with that.
So that's the brush
That
adjustments.
was the brush. Yep.
And the graduated adjustments. It's interesting to note that the graduated adjustments have balanced that sky from left to right quite nicely.
Yeah, they have. I think it's very, very important to do this as well. And one further point is that while for most of us, we like to get on with it and, as it were, finish our jobs as soon as possible, but really to get the very best out of a picture, it often takes quite a while, and you can do your first session, let's say, of post-production, come back to it, maybe having had a break for a coffee, or perhaps the following day, or maybe a week later, and you may feel differently about it. And often what you think was a great idea when you first did it, you realise was a mistake. And the beauty of Lightroom is it's all non-destructive, so you can retrospectively edit your edits, and you may well find yourself in the end taking out a lot of what you'd previously done. And that's one of the great strengths of this editing process.
The other nice thing about Lightroom is when you are coming back to these pictures and you have a set of pictures that you've been working on, you can quickly use the film strip view down here whilst you're in develop mode and tweak things just as you come back to them. Say you come back a day later, you can look through all your images over the space of 10 minutes or so and go, are they right, or does it need a quick tweak? So it's quite nice to edit them. So we're going to take another look at local adjustments on another couple of images in the next episode. Until then, thanks.